13 years old, I was administered puberty blockers and testosterone in high doses. And when I was only 15, they removed my breasts.
Chloe was quickly introduced to the idea that changing her gender would solve the problems she was facing.
If I get married one day, am I going to be a husband? Will I be a wife? I don't feel like either of those. I've had so much of my femininity stripped away from me, but I'm never ever truly going to be a man.
As a child struggling with emotional pain and confusion, Chloe was quickly introduced to the idea that changing her gender would solve the problems she was facing.
I was still unhappy at the end of the day, looking at my body and thinking, maybe it's just because I haven't gone deep enough.
Instead of finding peace, she discovered regret.
When I woke up from surgery, I thought life was going to be sunshine and rainbows, that I was finally going to be the young man who I envisioned myself to be, but it didn't work out that way.
She is helping parents, lawmakers, and young people better understand the lifelong consequences of irreversible medical interventions on minors.
So disappointed to see just how far the Democrat Party has gone to the deep end.
Please help me welcome my guest. Chloe, welcome to the Defending Freedom Show. Well, welcome everybody. I'm so excited for today's episode. I have with me just a courageous individual, Chloe Cole, and she's become one of the nation's leading voices, calling for greater protections for children facing one of the evils of our day, which is child mutilation and transgender surgeries, and really going and advocating to help children that are facing gender dysphoria. And I'm so excited. She's out there on the front lines through public testimony. She's legislative advocacy and personal transparency. She's helping parents and lawmakers and young people all over the country better understand the lifelong consequences of irreversible medical interventions on minors. And so I am so excited to have this conversation, and I'm honored to have Chloe Cole as our guest today. Chloe, welcome to the Defending Freedom Show. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for joining us. And hey, we mentioned before we got on, like I kind of want to go back and just unpack your story, your testimony. And so really just want to go back to your childhood. Can you kind of just tell me what kind of kid were you? What are the things that you loved doing? What was your family life like back before 15 years old?
From the very beginning, my mom and dad were working so hard to advocate for me. Everybody in my family was just stepping in to try and help me along the way. I was not the easiest kid to raise. My mom suspected from a very young age that I was somewhere on the autistic spectrum. And I never formally got diagnosed because at so many steps of the way throughout my childhood, throughout my upbringing, I just had so many difficulties with doctors in different ways. But she was always reading books, trying to figure out how to help raise me through the difficulties I had. My older siblings were always stepping in when my mom and dad couldn't always be there. And I was just always surrounded by love. And I was very blessed to be born in the family that I was. I'd always been a bit of a tomboy. I always tended to associate a little bit more with my older brothers. I spent a little bit extra time with them, and I really picked up on a lot of their interests. I always played video games. I loved going out and exploring, and I had a little bit more of a kind of rough and tumble personality and sense of humor. But I never really found that to be something that was wrong with me until around the time that I was hitting puberty. And naturally around that time, everything just becomes so much more focused on the differences between the sexes. As a woman, you usually are the first one to develop before any of the boys in your class. I think I was the first in my class to hit puberty. So I had developing curves that everybody could see. And it was just so deeply uncomfortable, especially for me to, in a lot of ways, being a lot more similar to the boys. And that attention was something that eventually, unfortunately, materialized into an assault for me that happened at school. And I was being introduced to pornography at a very tender age. I think I was about 9 years old when I first saw hardcore pornography on the internet. And seeing, I think pornography in general is something that really twists the mind and it really twists the soul. But for anybody, regardless of how old you are, but when you're a child and you don't have a full-fledged sexuality and you don't have a sense of what a healthy sexuality even look like or what that even means, that screws you up for a really long time. So I
Right.
kept trying to conform to this idea of what I thought a woman should be: beautiful, curvy, makeup on. And every time I tried, even just the little things like wearing purses or makeup, I just didn't feel like I could do it. I didn't feel like it was right. And the longer I went on trying to be somebody who I wasn't, the more I tried to fit in the mold, the more I just felt like I couldn't be a woman at all. And I thought, I'm never going to be beautiful. I am never going to be feminine, and I don't know why I'm trying anymore. So I just leaned a little bit more into being a tomboy, which I naturally kind of was. But I was 12 years old when I first learned this idea that I actually was a man, that these feelings, these thoughts defined who I was, that there are people out there who are born in the wrong body, and the only way that they can be helped is by undergoing basically medical experimentation for the rest of their life. And I was a very scientifically focused kid, so I was reading on like some of the papers, some of the like medical information on the so-called transgender community. But what really drew me in was seeing other kids my age who were going through basically all the same struggles, word for word, and thinking, I relate to them because I'm one of them. And I've finally found my path to happiness and out of this confusion around who I am and this struggle to really adapt to the world. It's all because I was supposed to be a young man.
Wow. So it sounds like some of that, you discovered some of that through self research, but also through watching some of your friends. Was that, we hear a lot today like that this is taking place in schools. We've actually dealt with stuff where teachers kind of have closets where the kids come in, they teach some of this stuff, they kind of encourage, you know, kids embracing maybe the idea at a young age that they feel like, oh, I'm a boy, I'm not really a girl, and then they reinforce that. Did you find that to be the case like when you were in school, or did that, you said self-research and your friends, but was that ever in the school system that you encountered other outside of that?
Yeah, so I think that a lot of people assume that for a lot of these children who fall into gender ideology, that the first moment they encounter it is like this dramatic moment where somebody is like instantly on the prowl and preying
Mm,
on them and just like introducing all of these ideas to them at once. And that often is how it goes. There are a lot of children who first learn about this through school, through like a school counselor, through a teacher pulling them aside and like having them hold secrets behind their parents' back. That's not how it happened for me personally, though. I learned about this pretty much entirely through the internet, through social media. I got my first phone at 11 or 12, which, if there's any mistake my mom and dad did make, it was giving me electronic
mm,
devices a little bit too early and allowing me to have basically unfettered internet access, which I don't blame them for because a lot of parents assume, because they didn't really grow up with the dangers of the internet the way that my generation did, that children are going to have a hard time finding like adult content or anything that is remotely inappropriate for a kid. And they're just going to stick to their guns. They're going to stick to like the games they play or like talking with their friends. And for the most part, they do. But for me, it was a slow branching out of using Instagram and following my friends from school and following my
mm,
interests to through those communities that were based around things that I loved at that time, that were age appropriate, that were involved with like art, illustration, comics, music that I loved. A lot of those kids who were running those accounts or making those posts about those things also just so happened to be in this so-called LGBTQ community, and most of them being
mm,
transgender. And it was through them just talking honestly about their lives and about their feelings about what they were learning, because kids will tend to, they once they learn something, they'll repeat it to pretty much every other kid they know. That's just how kids work. That's how
yeah,
they socialize.
right.
And that was how I was introduced to these ideas of sex and gender, or these two different things that some people have one gender, but they just so happen to be born in the wrong body, and that there is such thing as a transgender child. And
Mm,
these ideas, I was basically student zero to all of this. I didn't learn about it in school, but what I was being indoctrinated into is something that a lot of schools now are teaching in course material and even privately between teachers and staff to students. And it
Yeah.
hurts them. Whether a child learns about it from the internet or from a teacher, the indoctrination hurts them the same and usually leads to the same outcome of them first going through identity confusion and then going through the medical experimentation.
Wow. And you said growing up, like your parents, your siblings, like there was a lot of love there. Like, when did you actually approach your parents with this and like tell them, and then what did they do next? Like, what was their reaction?
I was always a very naturally shy kid. Even though I knew my mom and dad loved me very much, I just had a difficult time talking about anything that was intimate or deeply frustrating or scary to me. And this definitely was all of those things, these feelings that I had around my body, around being female, and not really knowing how to, I don't know, I guess, how to follow my female role models. It took me a little bit of time of kind of thinking to myself in secret, then first telling my sister about these feelings and cutting my hair more like shorter and more and slowly over time, just trying to adjust into this more masculine appearance and way of interacting with people, before I tell people, hey, I'm actually a young man, I'm not a woman, I never was supposed to be. And I told my mom and dad about my gender confusion by writing a letter to them because I saw a kid on the internet doing the same thing. And it was something that gave us a little bit of space to think about, like, okay, what am I going to say back? What are we going to talk about? And when we finally did, I think they responded very appropriate given their lack of information on the subject. They didn't want to push me down any route. They certainly didn't want me making any long-term decisions at the age that I was, because I was 12 going on 13. And they just thought, okay, let's figure this out as a family. We're going to have you see a therapist because this is something that is kind of beyond our means, it's beyond our understanding. And we want to help you through what we really think is a mental health issue. And I think they were right in that. But even well-intentioned parents don't realize that the moment that they get an institution involved, they are very likely going to go up against their wishes as the parents and against the against the health of their child.
Wow. And I know that so like when y'all went to see and seek therapy and your parents took you, did what was the advice given from the therapist? What was that like? Did they work with you? How did that go? Like, what was that journey like? Because I would imagine, I think you've mentioned before how the psychologist had told your parents, like, if you don't transition, that you could be at serious risk for suicide. And if I have that wrong, correct me. But I just wanted to talk about that. Like, what was the advice from the therapist to you and your parents?
So my mom and dad and I were given separate pieces of information. I had a few different therapists and psychologists over the next months and years for different reasons. Like, some of them transferred out of network, or I just like stopped seeing a therapist after I started transitioning. But the first person I found was very deeply unhelpful. And even mom and dad could see that, even though they weren't really allowed to be as part of the appointments, which is another concern of theirs because they were seriously lacking information on what was happening in my life. But they could see from the outside I was not getting better. So they decided, we're going to speak to a psychologist ourselves and really get to the bottom of this. And what they were told was complete lies, first of all.
Wow.
They were told that this was something that wasn't going to be a phase for me, that it was inherent, that I was born this way, and that there was nothing else we could do to treat this other than transitioning me. And they kept manipulating my mom and dad's concern for me and their natural love for me, and really twisted it into something to back them into a corner. They told him, well, it's obvious that she knows what she wants. She may be 13 years old, but she's not stupid. She's a smart child. And she's very insistent on this for a reason. But the longer you go without allowing her to become the young man who she really is, the closer she's going to get to suicide. So the choice is in your hands. This is the ultimatum that these doctors use
Wow.
to make parents say yes to something that goes against the instincts to protect their children that God gave them. And that is what they did with my mom and dad. They weren't told that I actually wasn't suicidal. That, sure, maybe I was having difficulties making friends in school, that I felt like an awkward kid, and I had some issues with my body image, as any 13-year-old girl does, as any kid that age does. But I wasn't there to say, no, I'm not suicidal.
Wow. And do you find, I mean, I know that you're heavily involved in this, this movement and done the research and obviously lived through it yourself. Is this the message that when parents are taking their children with this to therapists and psychologists, like, is this the overall arching message that they're giving these parents? Do you
Yes.
find that to be the case?
Yes, they insist to parents like mine that this could be, that gender dysphoria could be life threatening if it goes untreated. And their idea of treatment is chemical and surgical sterilization for kids. They think that the earlier you catch a kid, the better, so that they don't go through puberty, so that they don't end up looking like an adult man or woman, and instead you can simulate the puberty of the opposite sex. They think that puberty is just something that you can pause on a whim, and that the human body is basically like a Lego set that you can put together and then take back apart. But that's not how it works. This is not something that happens without consequence, and it certainly hasn't been for me or even for my mom and dad.
Wow. Wow. I want to ask, like, what do you think is the motivation for these therapists and these psychologists and these doctors to do this to children? Like, why would they want to do that? Like, why would they want to give that type of advice that would harm children?
I think the most obvious overarching answer that everybody points to is the money. This is something that's shaping up to be a several billion-dollar industry. And the younger you go, the more lucrative it gets, because the longer that somebody is on what is supposed to be a lifelong process. And there's a lot of complications that come with trying to block puberty, with putting in underdeveloped body on wrong sex hormones, and from surgeries. And there's often for the mastectomies, for the implants, for the genital surgeries too, of course, a lot of revision surgeries that go into it. So why would you not want to place, if you're a doctor trying to make money, why would you not try to place a patient on one of the single most lucrative paths in medicine right now, if you can even call it medicine? But I also think that it's something that is a lot more sinister than just money as well. Because a lot of these doctors, including I think my own even, they believe that they are making the best choice possible for these gender confused young men and women and the children. They have been conditioned through their training to think this is life-saving care. They even call it gender affirming care, and they use all these cutesy terms like top surgery, bottom surgery, affirmation, true happiness, to make these, not just the patients, but also the doctors, think we are saving lives by doing this. They think that there's an active genocide being instigated by red states, by red state leaders, by, I mean, even everyday people like you and me. They think that going against the dogma, that seeing the truth for what it is, that these kids are just boys and girls going through puberty, and a lot of these people are going through mental illness that can be resolved in more meaningful, less invasive ways. They think that we hate transgender people and want them dead.
Which is
They think that reasonable people are the enemy.
Right, which is not the case at all. We're trying to protect children from this stuff, but okay. So from the advice, from that moment where you know your parents got that advice from the psychologist, obviously at some point you entered the medical system. How quickly did things begin to move from that point?
It was, I think, less than a year, if even half a year, From me first going to a psychologist, to me having the referrals to the first few medical interventions, which were a chemical castration drug called Lupron to suppress my puberty, and high doses, weekly injections of testosterone at home to make me look and sound and behave more like a young man. I was 13 years old. I was halfway through my eighth grade year, never even had my first kiss yet, when I was put on this path to sexual mutilation.
Wow. And what did the doctors promise? What wasn't explained? Did they discuss the consequences of what could happen through these surgeries or through these puberty blockers? Like, what was the message to you and your parents from the doctors?
For the most part, I got the glittery kind of end of things of, oh, this is going to help you feel more at peace with yourself. You know who you are. You know what you do, who you are best. So we're going to allow you to, in your judgment, to take precedence over ours as the adult in the room. Was basically the
Mm,
attitude of these doctors. Um, but during the consultations for the different treatments, from the drugs to the surgery, um, some of the consequences were discussed, but not really in comprehensive detail. Most of the complications that I've had from these procedures over the years were not really discussed at all during
mm,
during the appointments. And these are things that I'm having issues with, like 5 years after my last shot. Things like joint pains, pelvic pains, urinary tract issues, very serious quality of life issues that affect me every single day, were not even mentioned or listed.
wow.
But it doesn't matter how much you try to tell a 13-year-old kid, you're being medically experimented on. You are going to face permanent consequences from this, and here's what some of those things can be. It doesn't matter,
Right.
because you're talking to a child. Children are not equipped to make adult level decisions around their life that will inevitably affect every single aspect of their adulthood. And I certainly was not.
Right. No, absolutely. And so the surgery happens, and life progresses. At what point, Chloe, after all of this took place, was at what point did you realize this was a mistake? I shouldn't have done this.
It was less than a year after I had surgery.
Mm,
I ended up going through with a double mastectomy at 15 years old to remove my breasts, because I was sick of binding. I was wearing this uncomfortable medical device to squeeze my breast into my rib cage.
mm,
And I was still unhappy at the end of the day, looking at my body and thinking, maybe it's just because I haven't gone deep enough. That's when you're dealing with the consequences of transitioning and you still feel insecure about your body and you don't feel like you're enough. The solution you're presented is just, well, you haven't gone deep enough yet. And
mm,
after you have surgery and after you hit the next level, you're going to be over the speed bump and life is going to feel good again. You're going to be back in the honeymoon period. You're going to feel happy with yourself. But that's not what happened. When I woke up from surgery, I thought that life was going to be sunshine and rainbows, that I was finally going to be the young man who I envisioned myself to be. I'd never have to bind anymore. I'd never have to worry about people seeing me in the locker room. But it didn't work out that way. The surgery was a disaster by every metric. I had different consequences, different complications, and mentally and spiritually, it was hell.
yeah.
I was 15 years old. I was physically disabled for a few months because of it. I couldn't even like lift up my arms above my head or lift up anything heavy, which I mean I've always been like on the more athletic side, so that was pretty devastating. I couldn't even go out that summer to see my friends for like 2 months. But what hurt most of all was between showers, between baths, and while changing, I would see the scars, the wounds that were there, and I just looked like a mess, and I knew it. I kept trying to really wrestle with this decision in my head and justify it as I'm still transgender. Like, I might not feel like I'm all the way masculine, but I also don't feel like I'm enough as a woman. I just feel like I'm this kind of freak who's in between, who's never going to fit in, who's never going to be happy with herself. But as time went on, I thought more about how this was going to age for me. Because now I was 16, I was in my junior year of high school, and it really hit me. I'm not going to be a kid. I'm not going to be a teenager forever. And I got to think about what my future is going to look like. What school do I want to go to? Do I want to go to college? Do I want to take a gap year? Do I maybe want to like go into a trade? What about more personal aspects of my life? Because I still haven't had my first relationship. Being transgender has kind of complicated that for me, if anything. I don't know what it's like to kiss somebody. I don't know what it's like to be loved in a way outside of my family or my friends. So if I get married one day, am I going to be a husband? Will I be a wife? Because it feels inappropriate to call myself either of those things. I don't feel like either of those. I've had so much of my femininity stripped away from me, but I'm never ever truly going to be a man. But what if I want to have kids one day? Will that even be possible with me starting on this treatment so young? And what about breastfeeding? Because I was taking a psychology class where I had just learned about things like parenting for the first time, including like the process of nursing. And from a more philosophical standpoint, the beauty of that, and from a more practical standpoint, how that helps a child mature into adulthood, and how bonding between a mother and an infant really affects the rest of their life. And I thought, this is so beautiful, but this is a part of my life that I'm never going to be able to experience. And I lost that before I was old enough to understand what that really meant. That was the final nail in the coffin to my transition. That epiphany of, this is not going to age well. This is probably going to kill me from the complications. And I know I've already lost something that I yearn for, that I wasn't old enough to have the instinct for yet. I knew that I couldn't go back, but I also couldn't keep moving forward in this.
Wow. And you were 16 when you came to that realization?
16, very, very tender age.
Man. What from that moment I'd imagine, what were you battling? Were you battling depression in that? Were you battling, like, how were you, what was that process like then? And then how did you start your healing journey? Like, how did you become the lady that's sitting in front of me today? Like, because it doesn't sound like you're that person anymore. You have overcome, and you've got purpose in your life. So what was that? How did you overcome that? How did you crawl your way out of that?
The pain of those first few months, and even like the first year of stopping my transition, is something that I still couldn't even begin to describe. I was 16 years old thinking, life hasn't even began for me yet, and it's already over. And there's nothing I can do about it, and I don't know what to do. Mm. That is such a devastating feeling to have when you're not even through high school yet. This feeling of, I'm unlovable, I'm broken, I have scars that will make it so that I'm just a freak forever. I really believe that in my heart, that I was just this wretched, unfixable beast now. Mm. But I had this hope that I couldn't describe. I didn't know why I still was living or still waking up every day, because that was the closest to suicide I'd ever been in my life. It was after I transitioned, after I realized my regret and the damage, the toll that it was taking on my body, on my life. But something was still keeping me going every day, from finding something to laugh about, to playing with my dog and taking care of her, and trying to rebuild my connection with my family that had been destroyed over the years, and hoping that one day I could find friends who would love me for who I was, and not for who I said I was, and not who I was on the outside. Because when I detransitioned, I lost the transgender community. I lost all my friends my senior year. I dropped out of school because I could barely even focus on my studies, and they had nobody to even see there. Nobody wanted me there. I was just a complete pariah. But I started making friends with people outside of school. I started making friends with with family friends, and just focusing on the things that mattered most. And that was what kept me grounded through one of the most tumultuous times of my life. From the very beginning, I was livid, and I knew that what happened to me was completely unjust, that I had every right to speak up about it, and that I wasn't alone. Because I saw the other kids who were in the clinic. I saw kids who were in the seminar to learn about top surgery. Many of them looking as young as maybe 11 or 12 years old, like they hadn't even started on hormones yet, but they were already there with their families trying to get surgery. And I just couldn't stay silent. I was suffering, and I knew that I had to get my life back together if I wanted to do anything serious about it. But I just felt determined for a very long time to repurpose everything that I'd been through, that my mom and dad had been through with me, for the greater good, to help other families, to help other kids, and make sure that what happened to me was never going to happen ever again in American history, or in the history of the world for that matter. And I never thought that when I spoke up at 17 that things would shape up the way they did, and so quickly. I just thought, I hope that my talking about my story is going to help somebody, but I'm not really going to do anything other than going to college, just getting a normal job, living a normal life, hopefully, if I'm ever going to be normal. I don't think that normalcy is the cards that God has drawn for me, though. I have never lived a normal life from the very beginning, and it turns out that even though I've been in this for about 4 or 5 years, I still don't understand why he chose me when there's so many detransitioners out there. But it's something that I have so much gratitude for. My faith has been the thing that has healed me more than any medical intervention after the fact, more than any therapy, more than any friendships or experiences or miracles in my life. I can't give myself too much credit, because I wouldn't have been able to get through it without God. And we wouldn't, as a country, as a culture, we would not have gotten to the place that we are now with the advancements that have happened in the law and legislation, in these court cases, and in people's hearts.
Right. Oh, that's good. Talk about your relationship with God. When did that happen? Like, when did God come into your life? Like, when did you find the Lord?
Being a very stubborn, very scientifically focused person, and just the kind of person who I've always wanted to believe things as they're presented, and I've had a hard time kind of abstracting stuff in my mind. I didn't think that God was real, that he was basically just this concept that people around me spoke of. And I had brothers, I have had members of my family and friends of mine try to preach the gospel to me very unsuccessfully for most of my life. I just thought, this is so silly. Why do you believe in this? There's no way that we can like scientifically measure there being a God, or like these otherworldly forces that you speak of. I didn't believe in spiritual warfare until I started seeing it in my own life. I wasn't raised with that foundation of Christ, of those values that come from the Bible, and I think that is in large part what led to my spiritual battle with my identity. And it wasn't until after I detransitioned, until after even I started speaking up, that I started to see evil just in plain sight, with people assaulting me, people chasing after me, people screaming in my ears, people threatening my life and my family, just for the fact that I was speaking the truth, speaking about things, real things that I and thousands of other kids have lived through. And when that started happening, it was like, I cannot believe that human beings
can be overcome by so much evil in their hearts over something that is so plainly obvious. This is one of the most fundamental truths of the human condition, the differences between male and female.
Right.
And they can't handle that. And I realized that evil was not just this concept made by human beings. It was very real. And I would have to recognize that if I wanted to go any further in this. I would have to have armor of some sort. I would have to have something not only comforting me and helping me heal from everything, but also teaching, also giving me something to hold on to in the midst of it. And the more that I learned, and from very early on in the journey, I have had pastors, I've had everyday men and women who follow Christ, teaching me that my story, my journey is not over yet. It is just getting started, and that people like me have gone through everything we have, not to suffer, not because God wanted us to be hurt and in pain and to have parts of us ripped away forever, but because he knew that there is a purpose that could be instilled in us through those bad experiences. And I have held on very deeply to that core belief over the last 4 years.
Amen. He took a situation that the enemy meant for evil to destroy your life, and you came out the other side, and God is going to use it, your testimony and your life and the calling he has on your life, to help so many others. Not just come out of this lifestyle or even hopefully deter them from even entering into it, but I believe that God's going to use you to bring healing for others, that he's going to use you to reach people with the gospel. And it's just incredible to hear your testimony. I mean, that blesses me so much. And I know that it's going to bless others that get to hear this. So that's amazing. What is God taught you through this? Other than that, like what has he really taught you through this?
Well, I mean, there's been so many different lessons that I've learned over the years. It's so hard to really just talk about one because, I mean, my life has been entirely transformed in just a matter of 4 years in ways. I've healed in ways that I never even thought possible. After I stopped testosterone, I ended up getting my menses back, which you never hear a woman being happy to talk about her period, right? And I mean, one of the things that first scared me out of wanting to be a woman in the first place has become one of those things that I realized I took this for granted. It's not easy to have. Many aspects of femininity are a huge responsibility, huge burden on the shoulders of every woman who has to have them, but they're there for a reason, and their presence is something that we should be grateful for. Because whether we're going through the good or the bad in life, whether we're going through easy periods or through the hard parts, God is using every single part of it to humble us and to make us into the men and women who he wants us to be. And that lesson is something that I want to spread to everybody I know, especially the people who are hurt, who are at different stages of the process of the gender confusion and transitioning. I want them to know, no matter how you feel about yourself in any given moment, God is there with you, and he is your rock. And he is not done with your story yet.
Amen. That's so good. That is so good. Well, I want to shift gears, and I want to come up to today, and I want to talk about the Chloe Cole Act. Can you talk about the Chloe Cole Act, and why does it matter for children and families?
So the Chloe Cole Act is a federal bill that is going to make it so that every single child under the age of 18 throughout the US is going to be protected from these transgender procedures, from the initial manipulation to the physical procedures themselves, the puberty blockers, the cross-sex hormones, other drugs that are often used, and the genital and breast surgeries and the facial surgeries that they do to masculinize or feminize these children. But it's not only going to make it so that they're impossible, it's also going to ensure that every child who has already been hurt by the system is going to be able to seek justice for themselves. I think that it extends the statute of limitations federally to about 25 years after a child turns 18, or about 4 years if they're continuing to transition into adulthood. And after they realize that this was a mistake, that they regret this, and that it's caused them irreparable harm. And that second part is something that I don't see people talking about enough, because yes, it's important that we stop this, but there are thousands of people who have already been through the hurt and the confusion, and they are not going to be able to truly get justice if they can't hold their doctors to account in court. And in so many of these states across the US, there are, I think it's 26 states total that have passed at least partial measures on this, but halfway measures aren't enough. If we're not getting the puberty blockers, if we're not getting the hormones and the other drugs and surgeries that are mutilating our kids, we are not going far enough to protect them. And no child in America will be safe until everywhere this is not going to be allowed to happen. And in terms of the more litigious side of things, in most states, the statute of limitations for these procedures is about 2 to 3 years. So that only gives a child a very small, a very finite period of time where they are able to take their doctors to court. I've had so many friends with just absolutely egregious cases. So many of them they were younger than me even when they started on these procedures. I know a girl who was 12 years old when they put her on the puberty blockers and testosterone, and she was 13 when they surgically removed her breasts. And her case was thrown out because she was expected to sue at 15 years old when she was still identifying as transgender. The time that these kids currently have is not enough.
Wow. And you think that's
and that is why this act is.
You think that's totally intentional, that they make that window small for that very reason?
I think that it's very intentional. I mean, part of it is that the statute of limitations for any medical procedure in a lot of states is around that period of time, which I don't think that for a lot of patients that is nearly enough for any procedure that could be harmful for them.
Right, exactly.
I think that the issues with transgenderism in the healthcare system really just highlight a lot of broader systemic issues. But this is one of the most important issues of our time because it's affecting our kids. Childhood is not something that can be relived. Right. And it is of the essence that we tackle this now. And that's why I'm so incredibly grateful to Representative Honor for not just creating this bill and pushing so hard for it and pushing so hard for the protection of children all across America, but also for having it be in my name, because even though it's my name that's on the bill, it's something that belongs to every single one of these kids, every single one of these families who has just been put through the meat grinder, who has been put through a living hell on earth.
Absolutely. And what are you seeing right now? Where is the bill at currently? And what kind of support are you seeing from our elected officials on the Hill? Is there a lot of support behind it, or are you getting kind of a mixed bag with elected officials?
So the bill just passed through the Judiciary Committee, which it's like the cherry on top, because I just had my 22nd birthday. It's like the best birthday gift I could have asked for this year. But while there is a great deal of support for it, unfortunately, it's become one of those very partisan bills, when this is not a partisan issue at all. This is a matter of not just left versus right. This is right versus wrong.
That's right.
And when you look at the polling across the country of how people feel about this issue, specifically from the pediatric standpoint of doing this to children, and even the most blue areas and cities, people think that this is incredibly wrong to do to children who are under the age of 18. So a lot of these Democrats who are pushing so hard for this radical mutilation of our children in these abusive clinics, they're not even representing their constituents. And it's so disappointing to see just how far the Democrat Party has gone to the deep end, to the point that they're willing to look away from the truth. They're willing to look at cases of children like me who have been hurt by their policies, by their dogma, and say, well, I'm sorry that happened to you, but you're just an outlier and your story doesn't matter.
Wow. And you know, one of the things that at Citizens Defending Freedom, one of the things that we do is we go and we equip the church, the body of Christ, to engage in these moral issues. And you said it perfectly. It's not a political issue, really. It's really at the core, it's a spiritual battle. It's the Satan of kingdom versus the kingdom of God, right? It's good versus evil. And a lot of times I find that a lot of churches, Christians, and pastors, they don't want to get involved in politics. Well, that's not really. We're just here to kind of preach the gospel. We don't want to get involved in that. But when we're standing up and supporting the Chloe Cole Act, I agree that is not politics. That is a moral issue. What would your message be to the church? What would your message be to pastors who are kind of lukewarm or passive on getting involved in situations like this, or getting behind something like this? Like, what would your message be to them?
I completely disagree with the notion that Christianity and believers have no place in politics. I think that for many of us, our calling is to be in office. Our calling is to be on the front lines for our country, for our culture, because it's that lukewarm attitude. It's that fear around getting involved or in these worldly matters or leading people down the wrong direction that has led to the infection of radical ideologies, demonic ideologies throughout our culture and even throughout some of our churches. This is something that we desperately need to tackle because this is so much more than just politics. It's not just some random policy or economics or anything like that. This is something that is embedded itself into our communities, into our schools, into our families. There are churches out there that are actively promoting transgenderism. How can we as believers, as people who are called to be warriors for God, just sit by and watch as our children, as families, as our friends are getting swept up in this?
Absolutely. Yeah. I don't see how you can sit on the sidelines. I mean, if that doesn't cause you to have a righteous anger to get involved, to see what's happening and hear your testimony and other children that this is happening, thousands of children, by the way, I mean, then I don't know what will. I don't know what will, because this is, as you've said, this is the evil of our day. What's taking place with children caught up in this system. So I want to pivot, and as we're kind of coming to a close here, you know, we've touched on your story. We've come full circle to the Chloe Cole Act, but I imagine there's going to be parents out there that are going to watch this episode, and they're probably going to be in a similar situation as your parents, where their daughter or maybe even their son comes to them and they say, you know, I identify as the opposite sex, right? I want to jump into the transgender lifestyle. What would you tell them? Like, what would be your advice? What would you tell them to avoid? What would you tell them to do? How can they navigate that situation with their child?
So I suppose I'll give the advice that I wish my mom and dad could have had back when they were going through this with me. Because at that point in time, there really was no other information than affirm your child and just say yes to them. Now, I think we're very blessed to be in a time where there are people who have been observing this from the other side of things. These critical clinicians, psychologists, these researchers, and also, of course, the parents and patients who have been through this and come back out the other side. And it's very clear that you don't have to say yes to everything. You don't have to tell your child yes when they're being given very obvious lies about who they are, whether it be from their teachers, from their friends, from bad influences, or even from the doctors who you might even have entrusted them with. It's finding a clinician or finding a therapist who is not going to instantly jump in on the affirmation. It's something that can be very difficult, but it's also really worth putting the time into, because if your child it really is suffering from strong trauma or mental health issues, that is something that they need to have addressed first before you're even having the conversation around gender. But at home, when your child tells you, I'm transgender, or I'm the opposite sex, do not affirm them. Do not go by whatever they ask you to call them. Don't call them by their preferred name, the pronouns, by the opposite sex, because by doing so, even with good intentions, you are going to push them further down the route of confusion. But in these conversations, show them you have compassion. You love them the way that you are. You think that they were beautifully made in God's image, but you also want to talk with them about these feelings that they have and get to a better understanding of it and know like where these feelings started, who's giving them these ideas of I am the opposite sex and this is the only way I can be happy with myself. Because chances are the further that you look in, and even just knowing your child, being the person who knows your child best, you can get an idea of what is causing these feelings. For a lot of kids, it comes down to them going through puberty, the natural confusion of that. Some of them might have other comorbid issues, some mental health issues, or a lot of kids overwhelmingly who go into this are also on the autism spectrum, or they have some other disability that is making it so that it's difficult for them to socialize. It's difficult for them in school or to really understand themselves or this confusing part of life. But with some time, with patience, with love, they will usually end up growing out of this. They just have to have your guidance in going through this, and do your due diligence. I have a page on my website that talks about how you can help your children through this. It links to a lot of resources that you can look for. And there also are a lot of resources out there, such as GenSpect, the Society for Evidence-Based Gender Medicine. I have a few friends actually who are reporters on this issue. Colin Wright, who talks about this from the perspective of a evolutionary biologist and kind of dismantles the lies around this in the scientific field, and Christina Buttons, who talks about this from the more cultural standpoints. But at the end of the day, you can't have every single discussion with your kid be about gender or about their transgender status. You have to be able to sit down with them, having a normal parent-child relationship where you can love each other, you can just be in each other's presence and continue to grow as a family together. Because that's what they're looking for. They're looking for a boundary. They're looking for reaction, and without even realizing it, they want your approval. They want your love.
Yeah, that's so good. That's so true. Well, Chloe, where can our audience follow you? Where can they find you? You mentioned your website with some of these resources. Where can parents tap in to get a hold of those resources? What's your website, and then what are your social media handles?
So my website, which I have just revamped, is chloecoleofficial.com. And you can also find me on social media as well. That's where I'm most active. I'm mostly on X and Instagram. I'm also on YouTube, where I do a lot of interviews of detransitioners, and I have a lot more content coming soon as well. And my username on those is Chloe Cole on X, and on Instagram and YouTube I am CHOOO 3 O's COLE. Chu Cole.
Awesome, and we'll put all those links down in the description for the video. But Chloe, man, thank you so much. You are just such an encouragement to me and so many others. God is using you. I can see His hand on your life, and He's going to continue to use you. And I was telling you earlier that Citizens Defending Freedom, we're actually going to launch a campaign to support you and support the Chloe Cole Act. And we're going to really pump to get that passed through Congress and through the Senate and get that put into law, because I think it's so important what you're doing right now. So God bless you. Thank you for joining us on the Defending Freedom Show. And if you need anything, let us know. We're here to support you.
Well, thank you so much for your support of not just what I'm doing, but the Chloe Cole Act, and also for being so kind to me before and throughout this, And it's rare that I come onto a podcast where we begin before we even start recording in prayer.
Yeah, absolutely, man. We got to put God first in everything we do because it's a spiritual battle. So,
well, you guys are awesome. Thank you so much for having me today.
all right. Thanks, Chloe. God bless you.